Good morning. For the first day in a long time. Don't feel like watching from the sidelines.
Welcome to the Core Conversations podcast by Ampelis, where our goal is to help you fuel, use, and rest your bodies in ways that unlock its innate abilities for physical and mental health. My name is Robbie Harmon, and I'll be your host. Well, welcome to our third episode of Core Conversations. My name is Robbie Harmon. I'm the president of a company called Ampelis. And our goal with this podcast and these conversations, as always, is to just help people learn to better fuel, use, and rest their bodies in ways that unlock its innate abilities for physical and mental health. So we're excited for today's conversation. We have Kim Stoddard, who drove all the way down from Idaho to be with us. And Kim,
beautiful drive.
if you listened to our first episode, Kim was with us then, and so you got a little introduction to Kim. But Kim is an entrepreneur. She started a company called Loom Journals, which was all about interactive journaling to connect with your kids and other people. She is just a very productive content creator. She's full of wonderful ideas. She's a certified positive psychology coach, a mindfulness instructor, and she's been a part of our team at Ampelis for more than 6 years at this point, and just does great work in helping take ideas and turn them into things that people can actually use. And today with Kim, because of her background with mindfulness, we want to talk today about how to really create resilience in an increasingly stressful world, and specifically talking about mindset and principles of mindfulness and what role those play in that. And then understanding what can we do to really cultivate some of those tools, a deeper sense of resilience using those tools, and what role that can help us, what role that can play in combating chronic fatigue and low energy and things like that. So we'll kind of go all over the place, but the idea is here to leverage and get inside your brain and things that you've learned about mindfulness and some of the corresponding practices in helping people cultivate more resilience in their lives. So
I am so excited. And as I was preparing for the podcast, I really pulled a lot of my positive psychology training into this, because resilience is such a huge topic in positive psychology, and the studies that support what tools to use to create resilience and to train it within ourselves and the people around us. So I'm excited to get into those too as well. So
can I go somewhere personal that you didn't maybe expect this question before we start?
Sure.
So you live in Grace, Idaho, small town, rural Idaho. Your husband and his family run a farming operation there.
Yep.
And growing up, did you ever was that part of what you envisioned your future to be, living on a farm in rural Idaho?
No. So my dad was an orthopedic surgeon for the Air Force. And so we moved all over. We lived in Turkey, we lived in Germany, we lived all over the world. And so I was really used to this kind of nomadic, you just go places and you pick up all these cool things from all over the world, and then you move, and then you meet new people. And so when my husband actually got a law degree and was practicing corporate litigation, when he decided, we started having kids, and I could just tell the shift of he grew up in a family where his dad was around a lot. He was able to, coach basketball and to be there, even though he was working a ton. He could always jump in the truck with him and go for rides with him. And I could tell that Jason was needing that once, we had the kids. And so I remember, when he came home and had the idea of going back to the farm, and I was just like, what? How do you go from a corporate attorney to a potato farmer? This is a big shift, but being, my background was you never stayed in one place too long, and now I'm going to a place where the house that I'm in, I'll probably die in. That's
be in forever.
Really foreign. Yeah. It's really crazy, and I never anticipated that, but it really is the life that I never knew that I wanted. It really is.
I'd love to ask the question leading into our topic today, because there's going to be, I'm sure, things that are just, you couldn't even have imagined how wonderful they would be, with that being where you live and how you're raising your family and some of the blessings. I'd love to hear just maybe a minute on some of the blessings, but then maybe before that, has that introduced any degree of stress or challenges or stresses that you didn't anticipate that are part of being there?
Oh, for sure. For sure. I mean, when you go from a occupation that you can, I mean, to a degree, you can kind of create your own schedule, right?
Yeah.
Like if you want to take a week off in the summer, you can totally do that.
Mm.
When you are tied literally to the earth, you don't get to choose what week it rains or when the potatoes will be ready to harvest or when there's a hailstorm and like 70% of your crop is just destroyed. So it really takes you, and we'll talk about this today, like this topic of resiliency. You Farming is you have to be resilient. You
Mm.
have to be able to stay calm amidst ever-changing circumstances that you don't have control over. When you're at a law firm, to a degree, you have control over like what clients you're taking on, what your schedule is like, things like that. I mean, when you're partner and things like that. So it's definitely a completely different. It took me a lot of years to be okay with that,
Mm.
to be able to say like, we're just going to see what today brings and we'll adjust to what we do, like, oh my goodness, it rained today. Let's go jump in the car and take a quick trip. Like the weather determines, and it's crazy to think about that. I never even knew that people lived like that. And now, so it's a blessing and a curse for sure.
But I love, and the reason I wanted to ask that question is simply because I think it is this beautiful life that you've created for your family, and your kids are amazing, and probably can't imagine doing it any other way because of some of the outcomes that you're seeing with your family. And it can sound maybe so idealistic, like it doesn't have the stress of other things, but I think wherever we are, whatever situation we're in, all of us have things in our lives and different dynamics that create challenge and stress and emotional just fatigue. And that's something we all have to deal with, right? Hence
Totally.
this topic. And if for whatever reason, well, there's lots of reasons that we could get into. I think those pressures and stresses are becoming more and more pronounced in the lives of people today, young people, older people. All of us deal with things that I think, as evidenced by all of our increasing mental health challenges in society. But I want to get now into these ideas of mindfulness and meditation, because something you've been able to work with people and help them navigate some of these challenges and stresses with using these tools. But let's just start with some definitional things if we can.
Sure.
So mindfulness, meditation, 2 words. Sometimes we use them interchangeably. Are they the same thing? How should we think about just some of the vocabulary here?
Yeah. So, and it is, people use them in different ways in different situations. But the way that I think, especially for our workshops, works really well is to pose mindfulness as the art of really bringing your attention and your awareness to the present moment.
Mm.
So, mindfulness practices like taking breaths or using our senses. So like, what am I smelling right now? What am I feeling right now? What am I hearing right now? To just really bring ourselves into the present moment, to align ourselves with whatever our goal is for that moment. Mindfulness or meditation, on the other hand, is really a practice for the past and the future. We use meditation to create healing and rest. And so for example, if I have a competition coming up, or maybe for this podcast, if I want to prepare, I can use a meditation to be able to mentally rehearse those things, so that when I show up today, I've already gone through this talking with Robbie and seeing the cameras and just feeling presence and peace, because I did that in my meditation yesterday. And so my body, my mind is prepared and ready for whatever is going to happen today. We can also use meditation for experiences in the past. For example, we had a client or a participant in the workshop who was...
Real quick, you have created and you co-lead some different 6-week series on mindfulness principles. You've done it in a context of women and in more of a Christian mindfulness setting, and then a general mindfulness practice and led people through six series, kind of education, interactive sessions, and then availability to answer questions and guide them applying their different resources. So when you say the workshop,
Yes.
that's what you're talking about. I just want to clarify.
I should have prefaced that. And we've also done it with teens too.
Yes.
So we've had all kinds of people going through the whole 6-week program, and it's been really fun. And one of the examples that came to mind using meditation for past experiences was one of the participants. She was, her grandfather had passed away, and she was a young girl, and she really felt like when it happened, she was rushed out of the room and she didn't get to say goodbye to her grandpa. And that was something that just stuck with her. And now she's probably like 30 something, and she still just has this ache in her heart for never being able to say goodbye to her grandpa. And so we helped her use meditation and visualization to be able to go back to that place and what would you have wanted to say to him? And she found so much healing and peace in that experience. So mindfulness for the present moment, meditation for past and future experiences to create kind of a longer mental period of change and growth and healing. So
okay, that's helpful.
Yeah,
because I do think having the vocabulary allows you to think about these topics. When you hear that word, it goes to different places if you have a common context. And so that's helpful.
And many people that are saying, oh, I need to do my meditation, they're usually doing a mindfulness practice.
Interesting.
And so it's just helpful to just know that there's so many flavors. Like there's so many ways to do it and so many tools to use that you maybe never would have thought about before.
I meant to ask you this at the beginning. How did you get interested in this particular topic of mindfulness and meditation? And what was the genesis of your passion for and interest in it?
Yeah. So I've always been really fascinated about the brain. And, in college, I loved those classes, just really was so fascinated by all the things that the brain does. And as I started to have teenagers, so I guess I need to rewind just a little bit, because when my family needed certain tools, that was when my entrepreneurial juices got flowing of like, we have this problem and I've got to solve this.
I'm not finding the answers. I'm going to create something.
Yeah. So that was how Loom started. Was I felt a disconnect with my oldest daughter, and the way that she connected and blossomed was through journaling. And so we created Loom, and we created Loom for siblings and for spouses, and it became this incredible journey of journaling. Well, journaling is one part of mindfulness. And so as my oldest got into the teenage years, I started to notice like there is so much that she could be involved in. There is so much all around her, pulling for her attention. Like, I just feel like we're running. Like, how do I create these pockets of stillness? And on the farm, it is like evident. You walk outside and you have fields and animals and the mountains. And so I wanted to capture that, but I wanted to teach them how important it was. And I really just didn't have the tools. And so, of course, I started reading books and I started learning, and I was like, that I started practicing for myself, and I just knew this was something that I needed to know more about so that I could help my kids and so that I could teach my kids. And my first meditations were just for them. And I mean, it was like magic. I would just have, I would play it on a speaker and they would just fall right asleep, and with these meditations, and even my youngest still asks for them. And I just, anyway, so it was something that I needed personally. And so I dove into it and got certified.
I love it. Jessica, as you know, my wife, who co-leads some of the class with you, it's the same thing for her.
Yep.
She's gotten passionate about this subject, mostly born of seeing the benefits that it could provide to her as in her role as a mother, and as she parents and guides some of our children. I think that's been part of her passion for it as well, which is where, it's so good to have that stuff that organically kind of originates in your desire to pursue something, because then you have experiences with it that let you then teach other people from a place of sincerity and authenticity. And so
Totally.
I love that, and I feel that when you talk about this subject, which is powerful. So tell us this. Sometimes people will say that this stuff is fluffy, like this is
Totally.
soft. Or we've even talked to different companies about things like this. And sometimes one of the critiques will be, I don't know if we can invest in that kind of thing because it's soft, it's fluffy. Talk to us about that. How do you respond to that?
And honestly, there are some pieces that are not for everyone. I mean, there's not a one size fits all for mindfulness and meditation. I think about my husband Jason. Like he likes my meditations, but there are other ones that I'm like, oh, try this, and it's like, oh, that was weird. Like that was like whether it's the voice or the music or the words, like it just didn't settle. But I see him and I see his meditation while he's on the tractor, while he's in nature, while he's, and so I would hope that we recognize that when we hear meditation, when we hear mindfulness, that there's not this is what it is.
One size fits all.
Yeah.
Like if you don't like the soft voice and the quiet music or whatever, there's other ways to engage in these principles.
So many other ways.
Okay.
So many other ways. And I also am always like, the Marines love it. And that is like the least fluffy people I can think of. And if they're using these tactics and these tools to better them in warfare, then there must be something there.
Yeah. That resonates with me. And I know we've together discussed and there's lots of research about some of these different practices and how they cultivate creativity and how they cultivate or combat symptoms of depression or excessive stress or anxiety. There's lots of interesting research. And then even now, as we're getting more and more people understanding the brain and how it works, there's still a lot that we don't understand about the brain, but there's some things that we do and how some of these practices actually impact the brain and different parts of the brain. For me, it's really helpful to understand the scientific basis for some of these things.
Yeah.
It makes me more motivated to engage in them. And there are some things, like you said, I love that you framed it that way, that it's not one size fits all, because there's parts of practice mindfulness practices or meditative practices that for me really resonate. And there's other ones that I'm not as inclined to lean into. I probably should, exercise that muscle, but I do love that idea that we shouldn't be turned off by one kind of paradigm or picture we have. And rather we should maybe lean into the truth and the science that is there, that is good.
Yeah. And I would also say, what do you need?
Yeah.
Like, what is it that you need in your life? What's drawing you to, like, why do you have this idea of mindfulness and meditation? Do you need to heal from something in the past? Do you have anxiety about, a competition or a presentation or leading meetings, or do you just want to feel more present and have more joy in the present moment? Like, there's so many, I would say, like, what is it that you feel like you need? Then look for the tools that will help support that, instead of just going into like, let me just try this.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Could you give one or two examples of that off the cuff?
Yeah.
Like, is there, let's identify a need. Say somebody is dealing with this, it's excessive stress. It's a big stressful thing coming up. What would be an appropriate practice to deal with that? And then maybe contrast that with another where they're, just to give people an idea of here's different practices that could apply in different situations, so we can start to develop a vision of maybe the repertoire we ought to develop be aware of, so we can pull the right strings at the right times. Does that question make sense?
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to so one example was my nephew. He had just graduated and he had all of these job interviews lined up and he was super nervous for them. And so what I did was I was like, okay, this is what you're going to do. You're just going to take 5 minutes, and every night I just want you to just sit and I want you to envision you sitting there. And maybe he knew the person that was going to interview him, maybe he didn't.
Mm.
But I just want you to imagine yourself sitting there and answering these questions and like going through all of the amazing things about yourself and say them out loud and, think. And at this point, he's kind of like closing his eyes and just replaying this scenario every night before he led up to these interviews. And it was so cute because he texted me after one of them and he was like, I did my meditation and then the guy asked the exact question that I was thinking of. And I just like, it gave him so much confidence because he had already rehearsed that in his mind. And so so he was able to show up like really his true self. And I loved that. But there's so many examples you could, like I had another teen that was super nervous about a play part and so not only did she rehearse the lines, and this is what I also love to teach people, is that you rehearse the feelings too. You don't just rehearse what are they going to say, what am I going to say, what is it going to be like, but you rehearse the way that you want to feel. Like, I feel confident here as I'm talking to you. I feel joy. I feel, and so we talked about, well, what do you want to feel when you're on stage? And so she gave me some words, and so we played with that, and I was able, to kind of create meditations for these kids for certain experiences, but now they can do it themselves, which is so cool. What was anything else? Did that hit?
Those are great. Yeah, Those are
Okay.
great examples. So specifically, you gave a couple examples of different scenarios, and one included like maybe some breath work. One included imagining and really envisioning emotions that you want to feel or you hope to feel.
Yep.
And repeating those and really priming your body to get used to and expect and try to create those things in that moment. So yeah, those were good. I was just trying to see match different scenarios to different practices to give people some at least directional thinking about, hey, if I'm in a different situation, there's this lever I could pull, or there's this lever I could pull.
Yeah.
Are there any? Oh, go ahead.
Oh, well, another one that just came to mind was, one of the very first lesson that we teach in our workshop is awareness, and becoming aware of the thoughts that might be holding us back or that are unhelpful for our situation. And one of the participants had a specific family member that when she called, she just automatically was like, oh no, something's wrong. Like, it's always something with her, right? And she's like, I hate feeling that. But like every time her name pops up on my phone, I just get this like, ugh, feeling. She's like, but I don't want to feel that way. And so we created a mantra or an affirmation that like, this is my miracle child. Because every time that, yes, hard things have happened to her and hard things continue to happen to her, but every time it's a miracle, like something amazing happens. And so instead of framing it as like, oh, something's wrong, she reframed to, oh, my miracle child. And so she practiced it. And when she came back, she's like, I cannot believe how much this changes my whole conversation with her, from just that change of thought when I see her name on my phone. So it's little things like that. Like even that doesn't seem like a practice of mindfulness, but it really is. It really is.
Well, I love
so
it.
many ways to use it.
And we want to identify on all of these conversations, these little by little stories like that are just give people a vision for, hey, I can engage in these principles and maybe I'm dealing with something similar and have hope. And so those are great examples, all of them. I would love to talk for a minute, if we can, about just building the muscle of these practices. Like what can we really do to start cultivating a more emotional resilience using some of these tools? How do we practice? How do we build that muscle?
Yeah. So it's when you say resilience, I think that sometimes that's a little bit like, what is resilience, right? Yeah. Like, what does that even mean? Of course, we all want it, but how do we get it? And what does that even really mean? And
sometimes, people will just, at least I, in my mind, sometimes have heard, probably not what people have said, but sometimes how I've interpreted conversations is just think about it differently, and I just like that maybe is overly simplistic to me sometimes, but I say that only to say, what can we do and where can we really go with these principles and practices to build that muscle? And is it more than just thinking differently, or what is it? So
Yeah.
sorry to
No, I
interject.
love that. I love that because resiliency really is like, well, in positive psychology, it's kind of like how we bounce back from whatever's happening to us. So you can picture like a monk meditating in the middle of a storm, and they call it transcendence, we call it resiliency. Like whatever's happening around us, we can stay firm in, who we are and how we want to respond to what's going on. So, but there really is like a spectrum, because on one side you have the people who are, something bad, I don't know what the word to say, happens and they just kind of break. They just kind of crumble. And then we have resilience, maybe somewhere in the middle, which is, okay, something happens to me and I'm able to bounce back. Like I'm able to handle it and I'm able to come back to who I am. And then we have at the other end, anti-fragility, where something happens to me and I'm actually stronger because of what happened to me. So that would be like the ultimate resiliency goal, right? And some of my favorite research on resiliency is Dr. Martin Seligman. And I hope I'm saying that name right.
That's right. I think I've heard it that way and I've heard it other ways, but let's go with that.
Okay. Because he's like the father of positive psychology, done some incredible research. And whenever I talk about resiliency, his research comes to mind, because the U.S. military came to him when they were going through some very serious issues with PTSD. So many soldiers were not able to bounce back into the life that they had before because of what they had experienced. So they brought this problem to him and were looking for answers. And instead of studying the soldiers that had PTSD, he was like, well, we need to study those who didn't.
Who overcame it.
Who
overcame the difficult situation and didn't come out with PTSD.
Exactly. They had the same experiences, but they didn't have PTSD. And in fact, some had that anti-fragility because of what they went through. So he kind of flipped the question on their head, and he really dove into what is different about the people that didn't get it. And I love this research so much, because he came back with 5 core skills. And these are some of the things, like the exact same things that we teach in our mindfulness. And so I love how resiliency and mindfulness are just, they really are great partners for each other. But one of them was the emotional regulation. That was the biggest one. So the ability to stay calm and recover in whatever is happening around us. Optimism was number 2. So this isn't just like blind positivity. It's really the belief that your actions can influence your outcomes. So we're not just saying, just think happy thoughts. This is like, okay, this is real, it's happening, but I know that what I do influences what's going to happen in the future.
Yeah, I think they call it agency in the field of positive psychology, is that I can influence the outcome. They use agency as the word to describe it.
Yep. And then cognitive agility. So the idea that like, it's kind of like a quarterback and options. So if one option is not going to work because there's a guy there, you're able to see other options and you're able to reframe and kind of be like, okay, that doesn't work. Instead of crumbling and being like, oh, he's in the way, I can't throw the ball. It's like, okay, there's more options. What else can I do here? Self-compassion. So treating yourself like you would someone that you love. And then self-efficacy, just the belief that I actually can do hard things. It is within me to do hard things. So I sometimes when I'm working with clients or thinking about like, what is it that this person could need or could use, I go back to these core resiliency skills, because usually one of them is there's a place in there that I can expand or that I can teach tools. And one of my very favorites is so I'm going to just rewind for a second, because when Dr. Seligman was doing his research, he found that one of the strongest predictors of soldiers that did have PTSD, like he could predict if this person is a catastrophizer and they go into battle, they're way more likely to get PTSD than his counterparts.
Could you define that word for a second? Catastrophizer?
Yes. Okay. So this is, and it's so fun to talk to this, especially with teenagers, because, and I'm going to tell you this tool that I have used with clients, with my kids, with myself for sure. But catastrophizing, and that's another word that, like, am I even saying that right? I don't know. Catastrophizing is basically when your mind jumps to the worst case scenario. So we've all done that.
Yep.
Right? So like you get a call or you get a text from your boss and he's like, hey, I really need to talk to you today. Like, what do you automatically
You imagine the most catastrophic outcome of he's going to fire me.
He thinks I'm the laziest person. Yeah. He's going to fire me. I'm not going to have a job. I'm not going to be able to pay for college for my kids. And right? Like, we've all been there. And so when someone was like, if they were a catastrophizer, this was a major predictor in how they would do after battle. And so I like to call it one of the tools that he uses to help people kind of get over this is I call it the pendulum of possibilities. And it is one of the coolest things that I get to use with myself, with the people that I work with. But what you do is, so it's already the pendulum, you imagine the pendulum, right? So it's already swung. We'll take that same example of my boss just called and I'm going to get fired. Worst case scenario, right? Now what we're going to do is we're just going to swing to the other side. What's the best case scenario? My boss just called and I think I'm going to get fired and all of these horrible things are going to happen in my life. Okay, now practice awareness. What's the best case scenario? What if he's calling me to tell me what an amazing job I did on that podcast last week and I get a raise or I get a bonus, right? Yeah. Like, so then you go to the other extreme and you talk about like, what is the best thing that could happen? And then you force yourself to come up with 3 more realistic options. Okay. So, actually we had that call today, maybe it's being rescheduled or maybe it's this, and you just help your brain to think of more options. You really are the quarterback of your mind. So use your other options and just notice what that does for your body. When you come from here to here, and then you fall somewhere in between, all of a sudden I can breathe. And what it does is it takes us out of our fight or flight, our parasympathetic nervous system, and it pushes us into our cognitive thoughts. So we're not stuck in panic. We're now using our brain to say, oh, there's actually so many things that could be about, and I'm not so worried anymore.
I love that example. Let's hold that for a second, because I would love, like we were talking about before we started recording, I would love just to do 30 seconds on the brain and how some of this works, which is, again, something that I've just been reading a little bit more about. And so correct me, I'm going to try to say a couple things and correct me if I get anything wrong. But that fight or flight response when your boss calls and he says, hey, I need to talk to you, and you have that emotional reaction of the catastrophic situation, a lot of those fight or flight stress, immediate emotional stress response feelings come and originate from the amygdala in our brain, which is part of the limbic system of the brain. And it's what governs that. And the communication that happens from the amygdala, those emotional responses happen a lot faster than our conscious thoughts. But what I love about the reason I wanted to go there for a second is because I think it's helpful to understand what's going on physiologically, at least it is for me, to realize that sometimes I have those responses. And what I really want to happen is to have my prefrontal cortex, which is where I start to really have conscious thought and govern my actions more intentionally. I want that part of my brain to take over and not respond to the emotional reaction from the amygdala, which happens physiologically a lot faster. So tools like you just described physiologically allow us to do that. Like literally that's the science that helps us. So I love that example that you gave, because that I can just picture in my mind like these competing signals. One's racing out there and then I'm waiting and I'm using these practices to engage this other part of my brain to help me respond more productively. and more purposefully in a positive
Totally.
way.
Totally. And one of the key words that I use is swing,
Mm.
because I can feel that the pendulum is swinging I can feel it in my body. Like I am upset, I am anxious, and then that word comes to mind, swing. Okay, I'm going to swing it the other way. Okay, best case scenario. Even if you don't believe the best case scenario could actually happen, it doesn't matter, because you're forcing yourself to think of other options, and then you can come down to the middle to what is probably more likely reality, right?
Yeah.
So I have another example, because it's hard to do this with little kids. You can't be like, okay, that's the worst case scenario. Now give me the best
Right.
case scenario, right? You can totally do it with teens. They get it. They eat this stuff up. But with little kids, I'm going to give an example of my youngest. She was terrified of the bus. She was so scared to ride the bus.
Kate. This is Kate.
Little Kate. And she'd cry every morning, like so afraid to get on the bus. And I was like, and I tried to reason with her at first, like, what are you scared of? Like, what? And she just didn't even have the words. It was just like, I don't know, Mom, I just want to stay with you. And you know what I mean? And so I thought, like, how can I get her? She was just spiraling. Like her little brain couldn't get off of the bus is scary. The bus is scary. The bus is scary. So one day I was like, I've just got to get her to swing. And so she was nervous. She was super scared to get on the bus. And I was like, Kate, what if you got on the bus today and this magical fairy flew into the window and sprinkled magic floating dust all over the bus, and the bus lifted up and you guys flew to school? What if like you went over the field that Dad was working in and you were like, hey Dad, and then you flew over the school and all the kids are like, whoa, their bus is flying. And do you see how all of a sudden the bus is scary is like, the bus could fly? And then I asked her, like, if you were in charge of the bus, what would it do? And so it got her out of that negative spiral of the bus is scary, the bus is scary. And all of a sudden I'm opening up her brain to some more options, and she's coming away from her limbic system because I'm asking her to get creative and to think of her own scenarios. And then all of a sudden she could breathe. It didn't happen overnight, but eventually she now is a great little bus rider. But it's just opening them up to the possibilities, opening them up to creativity, opening them up to other options. And there's so many ways to do it.
Yeah. And that's one of the themes that I like that you're highlighting in this conversation with your different examples. And even Jason, through farming and finding the way that he really engages some of these practices, maybe in not the conventional way of meditation, but for him getting some of the same benefits, is there's different levers you can pull.
Totally. And
you can approach it. But the thing that we should hopefully all be thinking as we're listening to this is, what is it that works for me? And what are some of the challenges that I'm dealing with? And then trying some things that help you with those specific things and starting to develop those associations. When I feel this, or when I'm experiencing that, I can pull on this lever and I know it will help me.
Yep.
Yeah.
Totally.
I love that.
So many tools. There's so many helpful things to learn.
Can we talk a little bit more about maybe one or two of them? I would love to talk about, because for me, it's been one of the things that's really helped, but my breath work. So there's things like breath work that are so accessible and powerful, but I'd love to just hear your reflections on maybe what role rest or breath work or some of these other things play that might be, unconventional, or maybe not what people think of when they hear meditation, but there's other things you can do. And I'd love to just highlight a couple of those.
Yeah. So breath work, breath is, like I talked about, the first lesson is awareness and our second lesson is breath. Because once we are aware of how our body is feeling, or maybe the thoughts that are happening in our minds, breath is like such an incredible partner for that, to pull out of our limbic system and into our cognitive brain. It really does have so much power to settle us. I think about a snow globe, right? And And so often we are in shaking mode. Like we've got the snow flying all over us. We have so many things to think about. We have so many appointments to make. We have so many tasks to do. Breath is like just setting the snow globe down
Mm.
and letting things just calm down for a minute so that we can then approach our to-do list or our meeting or our next task with more intention. And I mean, maybe I'll just share one of my favorites.
Please.
So one of my favorite breathing exercises, and there are actually quite a few names for it, but is to inhale for 4 counts and to exhale for 8. You can use inhale for 2, exhale for 4, inhale for 3, exhale for 6. You can change, but making the exhale longer than the inhale has some really incredible benefits. And it's one that is just super easy. I think you really like the sigh, I should have written it,
Oh yes, the one Andrew
the
Huberman talks about.
physiological sigh.
Yeah.
I always want
Yeah.
to say a different word. The physiological sigh is another one that is super helpful for lots of people, especially just like, okay, I've got 2 seconds, literally. So inhale as much air as you can get, a big puff, and then letting it all out. And if breathwork is something that you're really interested in, there is so many options to learn about. But I think that the most important thing with breathwork is just practicing it. I set an alarm when we are with people who have never practiced before. We have them set a few alarms throughout the day, like just to stop and notice. Am I nose breathing? Am I mouth breathing? Am I breathing heavy? Am I breathing light? So half the time we don't even recognize that we've been holding our breath as we were scrolling our phones or as we're working. And so we invite them to just try any breathing technique, but make it consistent and have some awareness around how throughout my day am I breathing?
I love that. I know Braden Brown, one of our former
Yeah.
colleagues he now works at BYU and but works with the student athletes there. And this is one that he uses a lot. And it's funny because he would tell me about it. And then I'd always watch the sidelines at the football games to see if any of the guys are doing that big deep breath. But it is powerful. And I would love, because it's so approachable, I love it because it's an easy
Yep.
place for people to start,
Yep.
to try something, as you just said.
Totally.
But you've worked with a lot of people going through either these workshops or in a one-on-one capacity. And I would just love to hear your reflections for a minute on somebody who's starting from scratch, from ground zero. They've not done any of this type of work. How does somebody go about creating and finding a routine or practices that will work best for them? Just what reflections do you have on that?
So usually before I work with a client, I do have them go through the steps of the workshop because it gives you a really broad base of lots of tools. And then we can get more like, okay, what actually do I need right now? But if someone is just completely like, I have no clue
No
about
foundation.
any of this mindfulness meditation, anything, I usually have them do a grounding meditation or a senses meditation, which I call it that, but it really is more of a mindfulness exercise somewhere throughout the day, just because it takes very, very, maybe like 2 minutes. And what it is you can stand, you can sit anywhere, you could be on a walk, and you just notice your senses. So what am I feeling right now? I can feel my sweater on my skin. I can feel the chair that I'm sitting in. I can feel the lights are a little bit warm. Okay, what am I seeing right now? I can see Robbie, I can see a camera, I can see, okay, what can I smell right now? What can I hear right now? And I just have him practice that once a day. And we talk about it. How did that make you feel? What did you notice? What did you notice maybe that you didn't notice before that you could hear? Oh, I could hear the birds outside. I could hear, I would have never noticed that because bringing them into a sense of awareness is really helpful to slow people down and to have them just feel that presence. And then we can kind of grow from there. But that's one of kind of the base things that I would invite people to practice at the very beginning.
Yeah, I love that. And
And it's really fun with kids too.
Oh, I can imagine. one of the things Jessica will do sometimes in the evenings on Sundays, and kids do love this stuff.
They
This is
do.
where I'm going with this comment based on what you said. And I think at first they thought it was weird, but she'll offer to do a little meditation and massage on a
Yep.
Sunday evening, and she'll have them lay there and she'll walk them through like a guided meditation and kind of just massage their legs and their shoulders and their neck. And oh, they just look forward to that so much and they
Totally.
love it. But my point in that again is simply that sometimes we can have these conversations with our kids, or maybe we're afraid to have them with our kids, to introduce them to these ideas and principles that can be really helpful to them, but they're really eager to learn and feel and experience these things. And it's empowering for them, I think, to have some of these tools
Yeah.
to know how to deal with the stresses and the challenges they're navigating, whether they're an athlete and they're got a big shooting a free throw at a critical point in a game and they
Yes.
can use breath work, or they're getting ready for a big test and they're stressed going into it, and they can have a little kind of practice, a mindfulness practice or a meditation practice to really visualize something beforehand, whatever it is that they do. I think giving them these tools is really empowering to them.
Yeah.
Okay. So, go ahead.
Well, another cool thing though that you notice about kids is they're naturally mindful. Like
Interesting.
when you see a baby cry, they naturally right? They
Big
do
breath.
the
Yeah.
parasympathetic
Oh,
side
interesting.
as they are crying. You'll notice how when they're upset, they usually want to smell something or feel something that's comforting to them.
Engage their senses.
And they want to engage their senses to calm them down. And I even, if them hold a piece of ice or smell, an essential oil or something that you'll notice though that they are like, just watching toddlers, they are naturally such mindful little creatures. And part of me is like, we're just awakening that within us. We even do a child meditation it's actually a self-compassion meditation where you envision yourself as a child and you think about all the things that you loved about who you were as a child. You're, naturally curious. You loved everyone. You love to get dirty and be outside in nature. And then we remind ourselves that we are that, I am that little girl. And I've had so many, especially women, just in tears after that experience of walking them through that self-compassion meditation because we forget.
Yeah.
So anyway.
So we need to have more of these conversations in the future, because I think we could take a number of these different comments or practices that you've just introduced through story and other things and go deep into them and even provide some maybe practice on the conversation or on the podcast.
That'd be awesome.
But we're out of time for today. And I would love to conclude though with, we'll call it ideas in action. So if you have one simple recommendation that people can take away from this to put into practice in their life, what would that be?
I think I'm going to go back to the pendulum of possibilities, because it really will transform your brain. Please, if you can just practice and notice when you're in that catastrophizing mode of worst case scenario, challenge yourself, swing it the other way, and then come to an equilibrium of, what are my options? What are my possibilities? If you practice that, maybe teach it to someone too. I learned about this thing on this podcast. Maybe teach it to your spouse, your child, your friend, and practice it, teach it. Just make that part of your life. You are going to see some incredible things happen.
I love that. So practice that pendulum thinking. When we feel that emotional response that goes to the worst case scenario, imagine positive outcomes. And I even love that intermediate step of identifying evidences why that catastrophic situation might not be the most likely one. And then practice getting to thinking about those more positive outcomes and allow yourself to start to pursue those emotions associated with that.
Yeah. So
Okay.
That would be my positive psychology one. My mindfulness one would just be to take a few minutes and it could be the senses meditation. It could just be sitting and doing nothing. We could do a whole podcast on non-doing and the power of rest, but just set your timer for 3 minutes and try to breathe, try to tap into your senses, or just do nothing. That would be it.
Kim, you're wonderful and authentic in how you use these tools and how you can describe them in a helpful way that seems approachable and accessible. So I'm grateful. I'm grateful that we get to work with you. I'm grateful that people, our clients, get to work with you. And as we conclude, also, I guess I just want to say thank you to Tommy Moore, who's behind the camera over here.
Yes.
Who's making all these podcasts possible. He, couldn't do it without Tommy.
No.
And also Garen Brett, who's allowing us to use some of his original music for the introduction and exit here on the podcast. Grateful for these good people who make this possible. And thank you, Kim. So look forward to more conversations with you on Core Conversations in the future.
If you'll have me, I'll be back.
Thanks.
Good morning. For the first day in a long time, don't feel like watching from the sidelines. Yeah, I'm waking with the sunrise. Get a taste of the daylight. This time